I always thought I'd grown used to the silence. Over the years, it became less of a void and more of a companion, though perhaps shadow is a better word, always there, quietly following me. Each morning I'd wake up to the same stillness, sip my coffee alone, and gaze out the window at the same tree I'd been watching for decades. Was this life? Could you even call it that? This endless chain of days where nothing ever changed? I was 42, and I'd stopped expecting surprises long ago. But then it happened. A moment so simple, yet it cracked through my monotony like thunder. I was at the grocery store, standing by the spice aisle, idly scanning the shelves. And then I saw him. He bent down to pick up a box of pasta that had fallen to the floor. As he stood back up, our eyes met. His gaze was so young, so full of life, so open. My heart did something strange, something it hadn't done in years. "Excuse me, is this yours?" he asked, holding out the box, even though it clearly wasn't mine. His voice was warm, with a hint of shyness, and I found myself smiling without meaning to. "No, but thank you," I said, taking it anyway. What was this fluttering in my chest? Why did such a small moment feel so significant? He smiled back, and his smile was unguarded and sincere in a way that felt rare. We exchanged a few more words. Nothing important, just small talk, but it left me with a strange warmth I couldn't quite explain. As he walked away, I caught myself watching him. What was it about this young man, barely out of his teens, that struck me so deeply? Have you ever felt something like that? A spark from the most ordinary encounter? On the way home, I couldn't stop thinking about his smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he spoke. It's foolish, isn't it? I'm 42, and he's a what? 20. What could we possibly have in common? And yet, why did I find myself smiling as I replayed those moments in my mind? The next time I saw him was a week later. I wasn't sure if I was imagining it or if he was somehow looking for me. I had convinced myself that it was just a coincidence the first time, but here he was again, standing at the checkout lane, his basket filled with basics, fruit, bread, milk. Not much different from mine. I hesitated for a moment. What should I do? Should I speak to him? Was that even appropriate? After all, I was a woman in my 40s, and he was just starting out in life. But I found myself walking over to him, my heart thumping in my chest. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual, even though my voice trembled slightly. "It's you again." His eyes lit up when he saw me, that same warmth and openness from before. "Hey, I remember you," he said, with a grin that made me feel both flustered and flattered. "How's your day been?" It felt like the most natural thing in the world. He asked me about my day, and we fell into an easy conversation about our groceries, the weather, the usual small things. I noticed how he listened to me intently, how every word I said seemed to matter to him. It's strange, isn't it? How someone so young, someone I barely knew, could make me feel heard in a way that most people, my peers, even never did. He didn't rush me. He didn't judge me. He just listened. As we chatted, I found myself laughing more than I had in months. His energy was contagious, like a breeze of fresh air that swept away all the dust and weariness I had accumulated over the years. It was only then that I realized how much I had missed feeling alive. I left the store that day with a smile on my face, and for the first time in a long time, I felt the stirrings of something new inside me. Could it be possible? Could this be the beginning of something? Something I hadn't even realized I wanted until now. It was after our third meeting that I began to realize something I hadn't allowed myself to acknowledge before. The way my heart fluttered when I saw him. The way my thoughts seemed to revolve around him long after I left the store. What was happening to me? This young man, barely out of adolescence, was stirring feelings inside me that I hadn't felt in years. And yet, I wasn't sure if it was a dangerous idea to explore. I remember walking home that evening, my mind racing. Was this some kind of midlife crisis? Was I just craving attention? I had tried to rationalize it at first, thinking it was just a harmless connection, nothing more than a friendship. But as I sat in my quiet apartment, I couldn't deny the weight of the emotions that had crept up on me. I had always prided myself on my maturity, my understanding of the world. But now I felt uncertain. Could I truly be falling for someone so much younger? What did that say about me? Was I crazy? And then I began to feel a guilt. What would people think? What would my friends, my family say if they knew? The age gap was so glaring, so undeniable. Would they judge me? Would they see me as foolish? But when I thought of him, his smile, his laugh, the way he looked at me, it became harder and harder to ignore what was blooming inside me. I tried to push these feelings away, telling myself it wasn't possible. He was too young, and I was, well, not. But the more I tried to repress it, the stronger it became. I wanted him. Was I crazy for wanting something so impossible? Would he even want me, if he knew what I was feeling? And if he did, what would that even mean? Was it something worth pursuing? But deep down I knew. This wasn't just some fleeting fancy. I had never been one to entertain things that didn't have depth. This feeling, this connection, it felt different. The days after I first acknowledged what was happening inside me felt like a constant battle. Every time I saw him, a storm of emotions churned within me. Excitement, guilt, desire, and doubt all rolled into one. It was like living with two halves of myself, one that longed for him and another that screamed in terror at the consequences. When we met again, this time in the produce section of the store, I could barely focus on what we were saying. His presence, his mere proximity, seemed to flood my senses, drowning out all logical thoughts. His eyes, his laugh, that warmth I couldn't get out of my head. "Are you okay?" he asked, his brow furrowing with concern as he noticed I'd gone quiet. I'm fine," I said quickly, but my voice cracked. He didn't look convinced, and I realized just how exposed I felt around him. In those moments, when he stood so close, our bodies almost touching, I felt a wave of heat rush through me. It wasn't just physical attraction, it was something deeper, something raw, something that terrified me. I wanted to reach out. I wanted to pull him in and feel his lips on mine, to taste what I'd been craving since the moment I first laid eyes on him. But at the same time, I pulled back. What would that mean for me? What would it mean for him? I was 42. Was it too late for me to feel this way? To want this kind of connection? The thought of a relationship with him made my stomach twist, fear mixing with anticipation. Could I even call it a relationship, given everything? Would he eventually leave, realizing the disparity between our ages? Would the judgment of others destroy whatever this could be? But even as I stood there, debating with myself, I knew one thing for sure. I was already in too deep. In the silence between us, he stepped forward just enough to close the space. His eyes softened, and I knew in that moment he could see the conflict in me. He wasn't judging me. He didn't seem to care about age or how absurd this might seem. Was it wrong to want him? Was I foolish for even considering it? And yet I found myself thinking about what might happen if I crossed that line. What if I invited him over? Would that be an opportunity for me to understand this feeling more fully, or would it complicate everything? The idea of inviting him over had been floating in my mind for days. Each time I thought about it, I could feel my heart race with a mix of excitement and anxiety. What if he said no? What if he misunderstood my intentions? Would he think I was too forward, too desperate for affection? Would he pull away, leaving me embarrassed and alone in my own desire? But the more I thought about it, the more it felt like the only way to truly explore whatever this connection was. I couldn't keep pretending that I didn't feel what I did. I couldn't keep pushing him away, only to find myself thinking about him constantly. If I was being honest with myself, I wanted to know what it would be like to be with him. I wanted to feel his closeness, to see if this thing between us could go beyond the surface. I'd spent years building walls around myself, convincing myself that I didn't need anyone else, that I was content with my solitude. But now, with him, everything felt different. He made me feel alive in a way I hadn't experienced in far too long. And I couldn't shake the thought that maybe, just maybe, this was something worth risking. I stood in my kitchen, staring at the phone in my hand, my finger hovering over the screen. I had to make the decision. Do I really want this? I asked myself aloud, as if the question could somehow change my mind. But deep down, I already knew the answer. I did want this. I wanted to see where it could go, to see if the connection I felt was real, or if it was just a fleeting moment. Taking a deep breath, I typed the message. My hands shook as I pressed send. "Hey, I was wondering if you'd like to come over sometime. We could hang out, maybe have some drinks, just talk." It was casual enough, no pressure. But I knew it wasn't just about drinks. It wasn't just about talking. I wanted to know him more. I wanted to see what would happen if I let him in, even just a little. I stared at the screen, waiting for his response. The seconds dragged on, feeling like hours. My mind raced with questions. Was he thinking about it? Was he interested, or was he just being polite? When the message finally came through, my heart leapt. I'd love to. Let me know when works for you. And just like that, the door I had been afraid to open was now wide open. The invitation had been extended, and now all that was left was for him to walk through it. The evening arrived, and I found myself pacing in my living room, my nerves a tangled mess of excitement and fear. I had asked him to come over, but now that the moment was almost here, I wasn't sure what I was expecting. What was I hoping for? Was I just looking for confirmation that he felt the same way? Or was I searching for something more, a deeper connection that had the potential to change everything? When he arrived, he was exactly as I remembered him, young, full of life, and with that effortless charm that seemed to make everything feel lighter. He greeted me with a warm smile, and I couldn't help but smile back, though my heart was still racing. We sat down on the couch, and the awkwardness I had anticipated never came. Instead, it felt as though we had known each other far longer than we actually had. The conversation flowed naturally, easy and comforting, as though we were old friends catching up. But beneath the surface, there was something more, a quiet, unspoken tension that simmered between us. He offered me a drink, and we both settled in with glasses of wine. The first few sips were enough to ease the tension in my body, but there was something else, something I couldn't ignore. My eyes kept drifting to him, drawn to his energy, his youthful presence, his undeniable attraction. Every time he looked at me, I felt the pull deep within me, something stronger than I had expected, something I wasn't sure I was ready for. We laughed, we talked, but the space between us grew smaller and smaller, until we were sitting just a few inches apart. I could feel his warmth, the quiet energy that seemed to hum just beneath the surface. It was intoxicating, and before I knew it, I was leaning in slightly, my breath catching in my throat. He noticed, of course. His eyes met mine with that familiar openness, but this time, there was something more, a hint of desire, an unspoken invitation. He didn't pull away. In fact, he moved just a fraction closer, and I could feel the heat between us building. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional, too. The silence stretched between us, thick with anticipation. I could feel the tension in the air, the way it pressed against me, urging me to make the next move. Was this the moment? Was I really going to cross the line? I looked at him, my heart pounding in my chest. This was no longer just about friendship. There was something undeniable between us, something I could no longer pretend didn't exist. "I've wanted this," I said softly, my voice barely above a whisper. He looked at me, his gaze intense. "Wanted what?" "This. Us," I replied, my words more honest than I had intended them to be. And then, without thinking, I closed the distance between us. The kiss was slow, tentative at first, as though neither of us could quite believe it was happening. But as it deepened, something shifted. It wasn't just a kiss. It was the culmination of everything I had been feeling. The desire, the fear, the longing. His hands moved to my back, pulling me closer, and I felt his breath hitch as I deepened the kiss. It was nothing like I had imagined, yet everything I had hoped for. It was tender, intense, and full of promise. In that moment, I let go of all the doubts that had plagued me. I didn't care about the age gap, about the judgments of others, or the uncertainty of what this meant. All I cared about was the way he made me feel, alive, seen, desired. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was meant to be. As we sat there, our breaths still heavy from the kiss, I couldn't help but wonder what all of this meant. The weight of it all, the uncertainty, the longing, the connection, was like a dream I didn't know how to wake up from. Was this real? Was this something worth fighting for? Or was it just a fleeting escape from the monotony of my life? I looked at him, his face illuminated by the soft glow of the lamp beside us. There was something in his eyes, something deeper than just attraction. It was understanding, a quiet acknowledgement that this wasn't just about the physical. This was something more. He wasn't in a hurry to rush things, to push me or make me feel like I was just some fantasy to be indulged. No, he was patient, waiting for me to decide what I wanted. And somehow that made me feel safer. The quiet moments between us became charged with a new energy, and I started to see things differently. I hadn't realized how much I had buried over the years, how much I had hidden away from the world, convinced that I was too old, too set in my ways to start something new. But now, here I was, feeling something I hadn't felt in so long: hope, love, desire. Those words hadn't crossed my mind in so long. Love had felt like a distant, fading memory, something that belonged to a time when I was younger, more carefree. But now it felt possible again. I thought about the way I'd always kept myself guarded, how I'd always believed that love had an expiration date, especially for women. After a certain age, society tells you you're invisible. You're no longer desirable. But in him, I saw something different. He didn't see me as old. He saw me as I was, someone who was worth his attention, his affection, his love. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I mattered. Not because I was someone's mother or someone's sister, but because I was me. I was a woman worthy of love, worthy of desire, no matter my age. And maybe that was the greatest lesson of all. I let myself sink into the moment, into the warmth of his embrace, into the undeniable connection between us. For once, I didn't care about the judgments or the whispers. I didn't care about the years that separated us. All that mattered was that we were here, together, and that we had found something real in each other. I leaned in to kiss him again, my hand brushing his cheek, and in that kiss, I realized something profound. Age wasn't what defined us. It wasn't about how many years we had lived or how many mistakes we had made. It was about what we felt in the moment, what we were willing to give each other. And right then, in that moment, I was willing to give him everything. The days that followed were filled with a quiet euphoria. It wasn't about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It was about the small, intimate moments that made us both feel seen and understood. The way he looked at me, as if I was the only person in the world. The way we shared our thoughts, our fears, and our desires without hesitation. I realized finally that love had no boundaries, not of age, not of circumstance, and certainly not of societal expectation. I had spent so many years doubting myself, convincing myself that I was too old, too out of touch to experience something as beautiful as this. But with him, I had found a love that was pure, without the constraints I'd imposed on myself. I had rediscovered a part of me that I thought was lost forever. Myself, my desire, my capacity to love without fear. In those quiet moments, I realized that love doesn't belong to any one stage of life. It doesn't wait until you're young and carefree. It doesn't disappear when you grow older. It is something that exists beyond the confines of time. And when you find it, you take it, no matter where you are in your journey. I thought about all the lessons I had learned through this experience. The courage to step into the unknown, to embrace what I felt instead of running from it. I realized that love doesn't have to be perfect, nor does it need anyone's approval to exist. It only requires a willingness to embrace the connection, to be open to the possibilities, no matter how unconventional they may seem. And in that moment, with him by my side, I felt more alive than I ever had before. I wasn't just a woman in her 40s. I was me, a woman capable of passion, of connection, of love. And I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel like I didn't deserve it. As I looked at him, I knew that whatever this was, it was real. It was ours. We had found something that was bigger than both of us, something that would continue to evolve and grow. And maybe, just maybe, that was the most beautiful part of it all.